That's correct. I think the last time it was on data products and data strategy, if I remember correctly. You're on mute, Gary.
Yeah, probably hard in the last few years, but it's more than that. I can't tell you what the number is from time to time.
Okay. All right. Okay. So Gary, thank you for always being available to present. We always enjoy the discussions and the feedback that you give us. So all over to you. So
Thank you. So what I do want to say is, look, I can't see the screen. So if somebody wants to ask a question or interject, please just, interact.
Gary, I will monitor the actual
Thanks.
chat. And is it okay for me to interrupt you, or should we keep them
Yes,
to the
I would
end?
be happy for you to interrupt me because truthfully, I don't want to
Okay.
lecture. I know John and I have had some discussion on LinkedIn, so I think this is going to be easier to try and clarify. And then I want to put, this is really based on my thinking, based on a lot of conversations on LinkedIn on the topic. And I put this presentation together, and I actually delivered it a couple of weeks back at another event. So I thought, let me repurpose it and use it here, but I'd like to try and hopefully make it a bit more interactive. So the topic was delivering trusted data products, and in this particular case in financial services, but not specifically. If we're looking at data products, it's not specifically for financial services, but I'm going to focus on some of those examples. I want to just hide that. So I think this is where I'm really quite curious to see what's the opinion or what's the thoughts about what is a data product. What I've seen in the last sort of 2 or 3 years in our market anyway in South Africa is chief data officers are becoming chief data and analytics officers. If they're still called chief data officer, their focus has shifted away from a sort of focus on data governance and data quality into data monetization, and they're being told, look, you've got to deliver value. And so one of the reasons that this term data product has started to emerge as a thing in the market is because people are being told, whatever you're doing, it's got to be delivering value, it's got to be a product. So it becomes quite tempting then to call anything I'm doing with data a data product, and that's part of what's creating confusion. So before I kind of give my definition, I'm just wondering, and I'm going to switch back to the Teams meeting. I'm wondering whether there's anybody else on the call that's willing to share a definition or kind of give their thinking as to what a data product is, and then I'll put my definition up and we can look at that. So I'm going to just pause for a second, see if anybody wants to say something.
Yeah, Gary. So it's actually the data product is defined in the DMBOK, and it's defined in the data warehousing and BI area, and it talks about basically the data mart and the BI report that one can use to help decision making. Now, in a way, I quite like that in terms of it's almost that first time where business can query the data and understand what's happening to be able to help them support decision making.
Okay. Anybody else got an idea or a concept or a definition that they'd like to share? No, that's okay. All right. So look, I think that's a starting point, Howard. But by that definition, pretty much anything we do around BI and reporting, if we've got a data set in the warehouse, it's a data product. And I don't think that is a good enough definition. So I'm going to go a little bit beyond that to say a data product is a curated and managed asset that leverages data to deliver value and insights, right? So often this comes back to the concept of data as a product. So if I'm a third party and I sell data, of which there's millions out there, I'm not going to mention names, that would be an obvious example of a data product. So I'm delivering data, I'm monetizing data. So one of the challenges with the concept of the data warehouse or a report by itself as a data product is it doesn't really add value in any way that IT hasn't been doing for many years. So one of the key parts to me around this concept of a data product is curated and managed is, it's that curated and managed part. If I just have data in a warehouse but nobody can find it, it's not a product, it's not valuable. So it also goes beyond.
So sorry.
Yeah.
I suppose where I'm a little bit confused now is the case of if I build a data mart and I build a report, and it is all the quality is managed and it's cataloged and it's looked after in terms of that. What is the difference? I mean, it's where's the difference? Is it just you adding more emphasis on the curated and managed part of it, or
Absolutely. I'm going to cover that in a lot more detail, but that is the big chunk of it. So the moment it ships, I'll get into characteristics. So part of it is what it is, and then part of it is the characteristics of whatever it is. So a report
yeah.
could be a data product, but by itself, without those additional characteristics, which I'm going to talk to, it's not a data product. So let me look at a couple of examples that go
Okay.
beyond the data warehouse. So one example could be things like machine learning models. This is all the rage at the moment, right? Machine learning models and AI applications. So, these could be things in the financial services space, like fraud detection models, pricing and underwriting models, recommendation engines, and those kind of things. Those could be data products because they're leveraging data to deliver value, right? Interactive data application. So that's anywhere where it makes it easier for me as a user or as a consumer to work with data and to explore complex data sets. And I personally, I think a really great example of this would be something like Google Maps, because we're taking effectively, location data, we're taking geocoding data, and we're making that data interactive, easy to search, easy to work with, and delivering value quickly and easily. Data APIs. So, anywhere where I'm making it easier for my users to find data, to access data in a defined way, to curate curated data streams or analytics or enrichment services. So data APIs could be another example of data products. Data platforms and marketplaces. So this coming back, Howard, to your concept of the cataloged data warehouse could start to form part of a data marketplace, whether that's internal or external. That make it easier for consumers to discover, access, and use data, whether that's internal or external. And then the last example I have here is our research and analytics product. So, this is going beyond the interactive data applications into providing information that is specific to a specific use case. So, for example, investment research reports, portfolio analytics, or market intelligence products. And effectively, the difference here is we're taking raw data and we're adding insights to that data to make it more valuable and to present it to a particular user for a particular use case. So I'm going to stop and pause there for a second, and again, just invite comment. Or do these examples make sense to people? Are there other examples that one might add? But it goes beyond data. I think that's one of the challenges, is that it's not just about data in the data warehouse. It's not just about reports. It's different ways of using data to deliver value to consumers. Yeah.
Yeah, Gary, and I putting an image in there that some people have. I don't know if you can see it, but some people have. It's nice. It's almost that hierarchy of levels in a data product. Can you see that
Yes, I can see
image?
it.
That is. I mean, and now I think what you added is probably that those research products that is quite interesting as well.
Yeah, so I mean, if you, for those of us that are, most of us that are on the call that are South Africans, we all remember when Liberty Life introduced Blueprint way back in the
Yeah.
1990s. It was a little application that, instead of an insurance salesperson, for those people that are not local, it was an application that basically allowed you to plug in your salary and your age and your retirement age, etc. And then the application would go away and generate some analytics and some research to support the financial advisor's goal of selling you more investment
Right.
products, more life insurance, more retirement annuities, or whatever it might be. But that would be an example of kind of a combination between an interactive data application and a research product geared towards a specific task. So another great example of an early data product in the days before the term was being used regularly. But it boils down to, going beyond just what those products are. It's the key characteristics of data products. So I want to touch on these characteristics. So the first thing that I think is critical, there needs to be a trusted and governed source of data. So we all know that the statistics out there talk about data scientists spending 60% of their time trying to find and manage data, clean data to make it usable. So the whole point of data being used for my data product is it needs to be immediately usable. So the work needs to have been done, Howard, again, if it's in my data warehouse and I've got my data store, are we sure that the data is clean, of sufficient quality, where it's coming from? We've got the lineage. So it's understanding all of that metadata and concept, context around the data to allow a user to immediately step in and say, yes, I can use this to solve my problem without having to do additional work. So that's a starting point for a data product. Second area is around ownership and product management principles. So I think you're going to touch on this probably in more detail in your talk tomorrow. But we're talking about applying product management principles to data and insights to bring them together to solve a specific requirement for a specific audience. So data products are not trying to solve every problem. Again, the more generic the data is, the more generic the report is, the less likely it is that it's a product. It's not solving a specific product problem. It's not specifically useful or immediately useful. So that really becomes a question of applying product management principles, and I'll touch on those again a little bit later on. And then the ownership also is around who owns this and what is the value that is going to be delivered by that owner to the data consumer. So again, coming from a product management perspective, the product owner is going to be focused very much on the needs and requirements of specific data consumers that will need this product to solve a specific business problem. Brings together data from different sources. So again, this comes down to data preparation, making data easier to use, and that the data is fit for the purpose for which it's intended, because very often data in silos, whether that's in a data warehouse or elsewhere, isn't applicable to solve very specific problems and to deliver value. It needs to be combined to do that. Discoverable, so that's about access. If we can't find it, it's not immediately useful, it's not a product. Or whether that's a report, whether that's an AI program, whether that is a data mart or a data store, it needs to be discoverable. That makes it a product if the consumers can find it. And that might mean, in a corporate environment, a catalog or a marketplace. It might mean in the real world an advertising campaign. So there's different ways to make data products discoverable. And then the last thing is that it should be, again, easy to get access to, easy to use. So I'm using the term data democratization to talk about the ability that the consumers that need access to this data product should be empowered to get themselves access to that product, whether that goes through a self-service process, whether that, whatever your security processes are that you need to have in place to protect the data and ensure that only valid users can access it. You still need to make that process as easy as possible in order to deliver a product. So again, let me pause for a second and just
we have John's
feedback.
John's
Yeah,
John's hands up.
Yeah,
cool,
I might
John.
have. I've got a little bit ahead of myself there, Gary. Sorry, I was thinking you might ask for feedback here, but I love these characteristics. I think the only point of disagreement that you and I have maybe talked about on LinkedIn was, how does an API satisfy these characteristics? Like, I don't consider a programming interface to be a data product, but maybe you can help me close that gap.
Well, I'll give you an example. So one of my partners in the US is a company called Precisely. Precisely provides a huge amount of data, for example, location data, geocoding, etc. But they know it's not just a question of saying, well, we're giving you access to that data. It becomes a published interface where I can come in from an application anywhere within my environment. I can easily access that data via an API. Type ahead. There would be a straightforward example. So if I want to do a lookup on an address, as I'm typing in an address in my ERP system, I can via API call the type ahead application. It's going to go away. It's going to query the database. It's going to come back and it's going to give me a list of potential addresses that look like they're going to complete my address. So it's effectively, an API is just a way, obviously the API then needs to be published, it needs to be accessible, it needs to go through all of these processes that I've talked about here from a characteristics perspective. But it's around making data more accessible to an enterprise use, for example. That could be an example of a data API that I think meets the criteria.
Okay, thanks.
And another example that we used in the financial markets, John, is access to Reuters and Bloomberg. And a lot of that access is provided to the analysts in Excel, where they can get the last traded price, the last date, the closing prices, all of that sort of stuff. They have the ability to get instantaneously what they need at that point in time. So these guys provide that API that links into Excel. It's not a product, and
Exactly.
those people can integrate that into their graphs and whatever it is that they require to build.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And I think that it's it's a really small sort of nit on my point, but the data is the product. That's another discussion that's happening a lot on LinkedIn, data product versus data
Okay.
as a product. So
I
yeah,
wrote a blog post
an
about that,
AP.
but I can't remember what I said anymore.
Yeah, I hear you. So I guess the nit that I'm sort of picking at is certainly you have to be able to deliver data, and I think the discoverable and all of the characteristics are there, but delivering the data is a different thing than the data itself. But I
Yeah,
take your point. Without the API, I mean, what good is that, the data sits there and it's just, not
but
accessible. So
you
the API
actually
is a means to an end.
yeah, you actually
Exactly.
bring in a very important point, because one of the things we did was, yes, they could get these almost instantaneous right now data elements. But when they wanted to go back and have 6 months of that data, or a year or 2 years, they had to pay a lot of buckets full of money more to get that extra volume of data. So you're right in a way that that API is small, continuous data, and then when you go for the big chunks or the big data, then you're looking at another product itself.
Well, exactly, Howard. So an API would be one example of a data product. You could have the same data packaged as an API, and you could have it packaged as an application, and you could have, Google Maps being another great example. You can go into Google Maps and plug in an address, and it'll navigate you from point A to point B, but you can also access that same data via API if you want to do it programmatically and have different price points. So I think that comes to the last characteristic that makes something into a product, is that it's immediately useful. So what makes an API useful is a program that can plug into it, they access it, they know exactly how to ask for the data, they're going to get it back in a structured format, and they can immediately plug it into their application. And similarly with an AI model or a data set, if that data is not immediately useful because there's work that needs to be done to understand it, to clean it, to integrate it, etc., then by definition it can't be a product. So this is the last characteristic I have. If it's not useful, then it's not a product, a data product. It's data, but it's not a data product, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So to me, the core purpose of a data product or a trusted data product is to transform a raw data asset into a reusable trusted product. And that's the goal that's becoming more and more the goal of a chief data officer. They may not structure it quite as technically as this, but at the underlying function, they want to drive decision-making, innovation, and insights by making data more accessible, more useful to the business, and potentially to external consumers. And I think that's where data products as well, sort of bridge the gap between a corporation or an enterprise that is not selling data for a living, but wants to use the data that they hold internally to make themselves more enticing to customers. So you take the data you have, you add context to it, you add insights to it, maybe you disguise it so that you're not providing the raw information out into the world, but you can make that information then accessible to your customers. So that could be things like investment advice, it could be things like budgetary advice in financial services and so on. Yeah.
Sorry, Gary.
Yeah.
Now I see lots of people are also confusing data asset versus data product, and I can see in here you've actually almost labeled the data source as a data asset, but is it an asset? Is it a liability? So
So I'm gonna talk. There's two different concepts here, right? So when we were working with Calibra back, 5, 6, 7 years ago, Calibra defined a data asset as pretty much any object that you wanted to govern within your catalog. So that could be a data set, it could be a data attribute, it could be a report, it could be whatever, a data flow. In any object or any, and I've used the term asset, any asset that you wanted to manage and maintain within a data catalog, they were using the term data asset. So this isn't a question you have, in terms of accounting for data as an asset, or is data an asset a liability. It's simply a way of saying, look, this is something raw. I've got an entity in a table, or I've got a data warehouse. That's a data asset. I've got a customer data table within the data warehouse. That's a data asset. I've got a customer name field within. It's just a generic term to describe anything related to data. But in this case, we're talking about raw data. We haven't necessarily gone through the work of making it accessible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get the way in which you used it, but lots of people are with the monetization, they're bringing in the data asset term. And do you see that in the same light as your data product? Because that's sort of where a lot of the stuff is coming from.
Well, I think that's where I'm trying to differentiate between a data asset and a data product. Is that it comes down to that question of saying, is every table in our data warehouse a data product? So I'm going to say no, it isn't. It's all a data asset because that data has hopefully got some value. I've written a copious number of blog posts on this topic. Again, I'm not going to, so I've looked at. If you look at the rich dad poor dad definition of an asset, right? He describes an asset as something that is used to generate revenue. So arguably any data that you have in your business is something that generates revenue, because you can't do business if you didn't have your contact information, as a simple example. So that would make it a data asset, but it's not a data product until you've applied these characteristics to it in order to make it immediately useful. Does that make sense?
I think that's a great distinction, Gary.
Thank you. So yeah, that's basically where I was kind of getting to using that term. So how do we deliver trusted data products? And I did want to talk about trust here, because there's a lot of talk about data products, but there's not a lot of talk about trust. I'm not going to bore this audience with talking through all of these topics, because you people know this stuff. But when I did this presentation, I said, let's get the obligatory groan at this point, because we all know how data governance has been implemented, particularly in financial services. It's been very heavy-handed, very compliance-driven, very IT-driven. And the result is that business very often hasn't seen value. So what I'm talking about here is delivering that value to give the data context, to make sure that you understand what good quality or good enough quality looks like in the context of your data product, who's responsible for it, who should be allowed to access it, etc. So that's what I'm talking about around data governance, to add value to the data. Data-driven culture through data literacy programs. So not as much directly related, but from an internal use perspective, to make data more useful. There's been some really scary and alarming statistics out there from various studies, Accenture and others, that said, most people, somewhere in the region of 20% of people, or 80% of people, around 80% of employees kind of say, we don't understand data well enough to use it to make decisions or to do our job properly. It's only around 22% that say we really understand data well, we can interpret it, we know what we're looking at when we're working with data. So part of a data-driven, of making data products trustworthy, is to start to improve data literacy amongst my employees and my product managers. Howard, you've touched on this, but making data accessible through cataloging and data intelligence. So we need to give it that context. A lot of this is down to crowdsourcing. It's what are other people doing with the same data? What are they using it for? How useful was it for them? Did it work for their use case? Can I use this data myself to do something similar? So cataloging and data intelligence are tied quite tightly together. Improving data quality, and then I've added to that data masking. So this is around protecting data that's sensitive, making sure that we can empower users to get access to those data products, but they're not seeing information that shouldn't be accessible to them. And there's some quite interesting technology that we're looking at now that's applying things like dynamic masking. So you don't touch the underlying data, but depending on who's accessing the data and for what purpose, you can actually apply masking in real time as the data is coming back before it's presented. So you're protecting the data based on policies. And then data integration and management platforms, which in many cases are moving towards cloud. So there's nothing here, this is tying together everything we've been talking about for a very long time. But one of the reasons I felt that it's important to talk to these steps is because there's a huge amount of investment going on, particularly right now in AI and machine learning in corporate South Africa, and I'm sure everywhere else around the world. But one of my colleagues, I don't even mention what company or what sector she was in, but she was saying, we're spending all this money on AI, but we're taking that money away largely from the budgets that were being put into some of these areas. So if you're not going to invest in trusted data products, you're not going to get trusted AI products. You need to have this underlying capability in place in order to deliver trust. Again, I'm going to pause for thought and for comment.
Yeah, Gary, there are no comments, but I do agree with your comment on switching the investment into AI and then thinking that it's just going to come right on its own. But yeah, that's.
I think, the impression that I get, Howard, is that executives are saying, we don't have the people to do all this data stuff, so let's just get AI to do it for us, and we don't have to think, the problem will be solved. And it's going to end in some interesting, I think it's going to have an impact. We'll see it, right?
A lot of the times I see that the executives are always trying to clutch on that new silver bullet that's going to solve all their problems cheaper and quicker and easier than what we're currently doing. And
with
they get
AI
sold
without any thought. That's the bit that scares me. I really think that the computers will think for us. We don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so last thing, I know this is a little bit small. Apologies for that. It was to try and fit this whole process onto a screen, but this is really just a workflow. And just to share with you guys, I've written an ebook as well, where I've got into this in a lot more detail. So people can either come to the website masterdata.co and download the ebook there, or they can just pop me an email, gary@masterdata.co, and I'll happily email it to you. But I've kind of gone through all of these concepts and documented them in a bit more detail. But this is coming again, Howard, back to I think what you're going to cover tomorrow to some extent in your talk, right? But you start with the product management focus. So these light green blocks, we're looking around requirements gathering. It's around understanding the need from a product management perspective. What is the potential use case? Who is the potential target market? And we start with that. So we might point, and I think we've got, I'm going to use an example. We might have our target market is going to be our sales managers, our regional sales managers, and we want their challenge is that they can't tell whether or not their brokers or their salespeople are going to make their targets. So the need is to give them a data product that is going to allow them to quite early in the month, they're going to be able to identify which salespeople are likely to make their targets by using AI, and then they can act quickly to address the guys or the people that are looking like they're going to miss the targets. Next step goes into specific requirements gathering. So that's in terms of understanding, in terms of meeting this requirement, what is the metric? What do we need to measure? How do we need to measure it? What is the user looking for? What might the report look like, for example? The next step in this, to me, is the one that often is getting missed by sort of traditional product management, is we need to then look at the data governance and quality standards for this particular data product. So these could be examples like, what data do we need to actually, where do we get the data from? So that's our lineage, is it coming from the CRM system? What additional information might we need to add to that? So do we need, for example, a sales slip? If we're trying to sell them, as an example, an insurance policy, Do we need to have an idea of what the customer's income is? Can they actually afford, the prospective customer, can they actually afford the policy that's being proposed? You know, there's additional information that might come into play that will allow us to make a better decision, or allow the AI to make a better decision if we're building an AI product. What are the minimum quality standards? And start thinking about those as well as part of the process, because it will allow us to identify gaps in the data sets or in the insights or in the quality that need to be addressed as part of the design. We then go into designing the data product architecture. That's the integration, the data pipelines, and all the rest of those technical details. We then go again back into product management principles of saying, let's build a minimum viable product. So, you know, what can we deliver that will add value to the customer, that will allow them to start using and working with this data product? It's going to deliver them immediate value. It's going to have one or two features that are immediately useful. We're not trying to build everything. And then we go into the test and validate process. We're rolling this out to our users, testing it, validating it, making sure that our target audience like what they see, and that they actually can trust the results that are being delivered. And then we really go into this deploy and operate. I couldn't say this the other day, and I'm struggling again.
Operationalize.
Yeah, it's hilarious. I talk too fast to say that word. Deploy and operationalize the product. So that's going to roll it out now to a broader audience. And then effectively it becomes a marketing and driving adoption on the one flow. So we're now telling our users about it, making it more visible, cataloging it maybe in our environment, marketing it or advertising it in the real world. But at the same time, we're going through this measurement and optimize phase of saying, look, is it landing? Is it working? What feedback can we feed back into understanding the need and building the requirements for the next iteration of this product until eventually we retire it? So that's basically a high-level process. And the goal of this particular process is we're emphasizing trustworthiness from the outset. So we want people to get data products that they can actually trust the outcomes of, that they're going to adopt, because that will drive better business outcomes. Then we're talking about things like data ops principles. Data ops is not just DevOps for data. I'm not going to start on that debate right now, but you know, this is really around bringing together multifunctional teams that bring all of our data people together with the users, with the consumers, to understand that we're delivering something of value. All of the fancy modern things we're doing from a data mesh and cloud and other modern data architecture perspective, and product management practices. It was quite funny because I saw somebody the other day talking about, is a data product owner the same thing as a data owner? No, a data product owner comes from product management principles. So you need both of those for a data product. And really, it's this step around governance and quality standards, which is being left out in a lot of cases, and it means we're effectively getting data products that we can't trust. Again, I'm going to pause for thoughts.
Yeah, Gary, one of the important thoughts is that don't underestimate the fact that marketing people should be part of defining that need. In terms of product management, they start off with value propositions. They actually take the architecture down to another level of detail in aligning it to your customers, the segments, and things like that. So they're critical and should be involved in defining those needs and the features that can go in there.
Exactly. So your data product owner is probably going to be coming from a marketing background rather than from a data background. Your various data owners, depending on your architecture, will be coming clearly from a more business background and from a data background. But that's talking to the data ops principles of rebuilding a multifunctional team to deliver an outcome.
Yeah, so I like to link my marketing thing up front so that they already know that, and they've engaged with the consumer in terms of what's good for them, what helps them resolve their issues and their pains and stuff like that. So bringing that up front is very helpful.
And also prioritizing, because it's great to deliver a product, a feature that nobody cares about. We want 100%. To deliver what's important first, right?
100%.
Okay, so in summary, and this is, I think, my last slide pretty much, data products package data and insights as consumables. And I think this is the bit that people get confused about, because they look at the data warehouse or the data table or the reports, and they say, well, why is this one a data product and that one is not a data product? And it's how it's been packaged, so that it's a consumable, immediately useful item that can be used by somebody that to solve a specific business problem. Trust is critical. I'm not going to read that part of the slide. We all know this stuff. Again, we've been preaching it for years. But again, speaking to a business or a product management audience, I think that these are the guys that we need as data management specialists to be able to educate us to the importance of ensuring trust, to manage the quality of the data, get reliable outcomes, understand transparency, privacy, etc. So yeah, that's basically the end of my presentation, and can push it back over to discussion.
Gary, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So anyone who, there haven't been many comments on the chat. There's just one, I think that's, sure, and I'm not sure if I can say the name properly, Luai. I like it. Many businesses put pressure on the CDO to jump on the AI journey without any data governance foundation. That really talks to your issue of taking budget away from proper data management and allocating it to the AI innovation hub that's going to build all these things. So then we have Drew Kennedy. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I actually really like the idea of data products, especially in the mad world of data lakes and data swamps and data reservoirs and all that other conglomeration of people landing data from every which way and then wondering why they can't get value out of it. This almost is an evolution for me of the dimensions we created in the early days, except that you're adding more product or more data to the data product and make it reusable and trustworthy, as Gary has pointed out.
Exactly. Yep.
Thanks, Drew. There's a question from Majela. She asks, can I say that a data product is information ready for consumption?
So I think that information ready for consumption could certainly be classed as a data product, but it wouldn't be the only example. So that's point number one. So it could be an AI model or a report or whatever. But also it also needs to be accessible. So ready for consumer, I'm going to take it to mean, yes, it's accessible, people can understand what they're looking at, etc. So as a simple definition, yes. But I think, one of the challenges we're facing is because everybody's been told, oh, you've got to deliver value as the chief data officer, everything we do is getting called a data product, and that's part of what's creating confusion. So yeah, it needs to be useful and solving a specific problem, then it's a product.
And Gary, I like what you're saying, and a lot of the BI data product could come from there as well. But what you're saying as well, and I've found that when we talk about data products, even sometimes a data literacy program, right, that can be fitting into a data product that comes from a data initiative. So it is quite tricky in that definition.
Correct. Yep, Drew.
Yeah, the other point that I feel quite strongly about, I know you say that if you need a data product owner typically coming out of business, or maybe they're the recipient, but I feel very strongly that whoever builds that data product has to keep a really strong sense of responsibility and accountability for it to ensure that it's up to date, it's accurate, it's fresh, and everything else. So just like you would have a master data owner, I believe that you've got a technical data owner for a data product typically coming out of one of those either data management or analytic type teams.
Give me a second, John, I'm going to get you. But Drew, I agree with you. But so I actually wrote a blog post again, if you go to blog.masterdata.co sometime in the last couple of weeks, that was looking at data product owner versus data owner and trying to describe the difference. So the data product owner is really the marketing person that's looking at the business requirement, the value proposition, and how we're going to deliver that. But they need to be working very closely with the data governance team, the data management team, the data engineering team to actually deliver value. So I don't think it's the data product owner's responsibility necessarily to be looking after data quality and data drift and those kind of issues that can affect the outcome. but they should be working closely with the data owners and the data governance team that can do that for them. Yes, John.
Oh yeah, great presentation, Gary. Thanks so much. I just wondered, so you used Google addresses as an example of a data product, and I wanted to ask you, since the data mesh, one of the data mesh principles is centralized governance, how granular can a data product be?
I'm not sure if I understand the question properly. I know it might sound stupid, but what do you mean by how granular can it be?
Well, so an address is fairly granular. I guess what we're driving at, Mark and I have been talking quite a while, working together on some of these ideas, and the food supply chain is a really good example. So like a granular, so if, for example, the data literacy starts with language of the business sort of thing, that's the theory. So if you're building a business glossary to make data more accessible, then the glossary values themselves should have high quality and trustworthiness and all that kind of thing. So I think when you sort of move, we're using this upstream, midstream, downstream quite a bit. There's way too much money being spent midstream trying to munge all this data and stuff. So if you really want, and actually interoperability comes into it, but that's a whole other conversation. But if you really want to have high quality data, you have to start with high quality glossaries and high quality vocabularies. That's the principles. So I just wondered if you had an opinion on like how small can a definition be a data product? Can a glossary be a data product?
I don't think it would be infinitely granular, and I've never been asked this question before, so I'm making up my answer on the fly. But looking at the Google example, an individual address is not a product. It is the combination of addresses that are packaged and accessible via different mechanisms that makes it into a product. So I would say to you, with a little bit of reservation, but for the sake of the argument, your business glossary as a concept could be seen as a product. I don't think an individual attribute within a business glossary would be a product. So it's, you know, it needs to be meeting a purpose, and what purpose does an individual address deliver, as an example? It's quite, you know, in its own right, it's getting really, really specific. So to me, a product is a little bit more general than that. So I do think there's a limit to how granular you can go and still call something a product. But I don't know what the answer is. I'll think about it and maybe I'll write a blog post.
Yeah,
Gary,
I'm gonna review the deck again just to see if it can check all the boxes for that.
Cool.
So Gary, one of the things that Reuters and Bloomberg does is that they have a unit of billing, which is one API request, which would be similar to your Google request where they ask for an address and a qualification on the address. But the product is agreed at the interface level and the ability to interact. And then there's a monthly billing. So one call is really just one unit of execution, which then has a price. And that's similar to generative AI and large language models, is that they say, here's the product, you can prompt and engineer that product, but you know, you're going to be paying a certain amount, and then your value or your increments are going to go up by call.
Yeah, but I think in both of those examples, the product is the LM, the large language model. It's not an individual call to the large language model. So the pricing model might break into a different, you know, but let me go back to the precisely example. If I've got a set of data, I can sell you the data set that says, you know, here's all the addresses in South Africa with geocodes, and that's a product. But I can also sell you an API call product that says you can call an API that does type ahead and returns valid addresses that meet the criteria. So there's two products there that are, you know, based on the way they are packaged. So I do think that John's question is interesting, but I also do think there's limits on how granular you can get and still call something a product. It would be based on how valuable. Is it still valuable? I think that would be the question to ask. Is it still valuable at this level of granularity? Then by that definition, I would argue probably you could call it a product. It's easier to have these discussions via voice, John, than it was via LinkedIn, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's sort of like the old thing about texts and emails. You have to be careful about tone, because people will interpret things in a very, very different ways than you intended. And it's like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah.
So yeah, agree, Gary.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Any other, Don, I'd love to hear your comments. I know you are building a data product platform for economic data. I know you've got a similar, what is your understanding of that productization?
I think this is a very interesting debate. I broadly agreed with everything that's been said, that there has been this proliferation of the use of the term data product, and it's not always helpful. And I think the principles that have been outlined have been excellent. For me, I think there's one of the things that we've been thinking about is whether the data glossary element of it could represent a data product itself. It's not something that we're currently really presenting as a solution in our context, but I think for example, the infrastructure that we're developing, because it's based on an SDMX information model, it bakes in a specific approach to metadata, and then by the process of structuring data, you end up automatically creating a data glossary. So I have been thinking about whether that element represents could represent maybe not a data product, but a product, a feature that's very attractive as a solution itself. Perhaps just a comment on, I think that the discussion around value creation. I think there are lots of the things that have been listed might be produced within teams to solve specific challenges in a business context, but the extent to which they really add value, is often hard from a management perspective to determine. So you often have members of a team producing something that has characteristics of a data product, but the question is, from an institutional perspective, can that be monetized, or can that solution be used in other contexts to create value, and how do you measure that? So it raises all sorts of interesting questions. So I've really enjoyed today's presentation and discussion.
Thanks, Don. Gary, any comments?
No, I mean, he's preaching to the converted. I think. Yeah, I mean, I also would struggle with the idea of a business glossary as a data product. It is a product. I do think that a business glossary is a product, and one of the challenges is that far too many business glossaries are buried somewhere in a metadata tool that only a couple of technical experts have got access to. So if your business glossary is not visible, it's not a product. If your users can't understand what the term is defined as, it's not a product. So, but is it a data product? I think it doesn't really use data. But a business glossary is essential to the delivery of data products, because it's defining everything that's in the data product. So I think it's part of a data product. I don't think it's a data product in its own right, but yeah.
It is interesting, because you could actually take the glossary to an ontology, which becomes data. Metadata is data, it's elevated to data. So would an ontology, in terms of a controlled vocabulary, or micro in terms of economic data that Don deals with, or a series on GDP data, I think lots of people would enjoy that and would find that very helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, look, you see these things commercialized, right? So, and we know that. I'm not going to, but then it becomes a question of saying, how do we present that? Then it becomes there's an API, or there's a structure, or there's
Sure.
Yeah. I also, I think, my intention with this presentation when I put it together wasn't to say, look, I'm prescribing and this is the only way it can be.
No, sure.
I'm trying to get through all the confusion and put a basic framework in place that made sense to me. And it's around what am I delivering, and then the characteristics of what it is. So you need the two things in combination to make a data product, but the specific examples could go well beyond what I've come up with here.
Yeah, I would argue if we can call an API a product, that a glossary with an API, I guess
Yeah.
the distinction is the qualifier of is it a data product? Like you said, Gary, it's a product. Okay, cool. Does it have value? I think so. In terms of access,
Exactly.
like most, like I think at the top of your presentation said it's not a data product if people can't find it and use it. And the best way that I know to help users, especially ones who struggle with data literacy, to find stuff is to use their own language. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's not maybe not a data product, but it's in terms of a wrapper or to access, it has utility, it has value, it has, I think it has financial sort of implications, whether it's monetizing or saving money. So yeah, it's interesting discussion to sort of tease out the nuances, I guess.
Well,
Which is great. That's what a
there's a
presentation is
topic
for.
a topic for another session, Howard. Let John
Yeah.
come and chat about business glossary. Is it a data product?
Well, I mean,
Yeah, and if,
I just think of things like fiber, right? EDM Council are making lots of money out of it. And people are paying for a financial business ontology.
Yep. Cool.
It's a good topic. I like it. And we'll certainly go into that a little bit further.
yeah, and I think Gary, just as kudos to you, sir, is I think a real hallmark of a good presentation is the discussion that entails afterwards. When you get the crickets and stuff, people either weren't engaged or the message was delivered. So yeah, I think you did a great job of getting this whole thing kickstarted. And so yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Any further questions before we turn off the recording? Anybody else? Great. Okay, Gary, thank you so much for your presentation. And as John said, it's been a great one. Lots of engagement. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Howard. Appreciate it.
Okay. Cheers,
Thanks,
everybody.
Howard. Thanks, Gary.
Yes.
Thanks, John.
Cheers,
Lovely
everybody.
to see you
Depending
again.
on where you
Yeah,
are in the world.
likewise.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, cheers. Cheers, Hussein. Alrighty. I'm going to close down now.